Hi, welcome to another Stream Developers tutorial on React Native. In this video, we dive into how to set up React Native CLI smoothly on Apple Silicon and Intel Macs. So why is this important? If you follow the official React Native documentation to do the installation and setup, you may still encounter some errors. In this video, we will still follow the steps outlined in the official documentation, but I will show you what to do differently in order to avoid these errors. You may also ask, why don't we use a framework like Xcode to make things simple? In part 2 of this tutorial, we will continue from this video to build a fully functional audio room app that will require a custom code implementation for iOS and Android. In that case, using the React Native CLI is the best option. Also, we'll build the audio room app using the Streams Video SDK for React Native, which does not support the Xcode Go app. So let's begin by installing some dependencies. We will do platform-specific installations. Then we create a new React Native project using the official template. I'll show you how to do platform-specific configurations for iOS and Android. Finally, we will test the app using an iPhone and Android device. Let's start by installing some dependencies: Node, Homebrew, and Watchman. I have already launched the terminal app on my device. You can also use your favorite command line tool like warp. Before we do anything here, let's go to the official React Native documentation. Under the category Setting up the development environment, you can see here we have two options: Expo and using the React Native CLI. As I explained previously, we are going to use the CLI Quick Start option. And the development OS is Mac OS. Then for the target OS, we are going to do both Android and iOS. We need to install Homebrew. We will use Homebrew to install Watchman and CocoaPods. So all we need to do is to copy this command and run it in the command line. I have already done that, so I'm not going to run it again. Let's go to the React Native documentation again. The first dependency we need to install is Node. We can install that with this command. For everything to work smoothly, you need to make sure you have Node version 18 or a later version. You can also go to the Node homepage and select the LTS version, which is the long-term support version. If you select the current version, you may encounter some problems. So if you want to install it from here, you need to select the LTS version. So first, we need to install Node. I have already installed that. So let's check the version I have. In the documentation, it requires version 18 or a later version. You can see here I have version 20.11.1. So when you do the Node installation, it will be installed in the directory user local bin. We need to put this directory in our path. To put the directory in the path on our system, we can use this command. I have already done that. Another option is to go to the .zshrc file on your system and add the path manually. To do that, let's go to the Finder and add a new Finder window. We can access that with Shift, Command, and H. The .zshrc file is a hidden file. To show hidden files on a Mac, we need to press Shift, Command, and period. It is the one over here. So I will control-click and open with Text Edit. So you can see I have already added it here. Let's go back to the React Native documentation again. What we need to do next is to install Watchman. So once we install Watchman, it will watch all the files in our project for changes. So we can use this command to install it. I have already done that, so I'm not going to install it again. We can check the version of Watchman. So that shows you the date when you installed Watchman. You can visit the Watchman website and go to the documentation to learn more. After installing Watchman, we need to install the required IDEs. We will use VS Code. I have already installed that. If you don't have that, I encourage you to install it. So in this tutorial, we are going to use VS Code to do the actual development and use Xcode to preview the iOS version of the app. We will also need Android Studio. The latest version is Android Studio Iguana. For this tutorial, I'm going to use an older version, which is Android Studio Giraffe. Next, you will need to install Xcode. I have already installed Xcode 15, so you can also download it from here. Both Android and iOS have specific settings. So let's begin with the Xcode version. What we need to do here is to set up Xcode command line tools. I'm going to open Xcode. So when you launch Xcode, you go to the toolbar and click Xcode and select Settings. Select the Locations tab. Then you make sure you have the Xcode version selected under the command line tools. During the Xcode installation, you will get a prompt to install some simulators that comes with the Xcode installation. If you want to run the app on a simulator, you need to check the option in order to install those simulators. I have already done all of that, so I'm not going to install any simulator for iOS. Next, let's launch Android Studio. In Android Studio, we need to do two settings. One is the emulator. So we go to more options. You can see here we have Virtual Device Manager. Let's click that. I have already added a virtual device to run the app on. So over here, we can remove it or just duplicate it. Also, I have added a physical device to run the app on. To add a new virtual device, we go to the top left and click the plus icon. And here we can select from any of these devices and add them. But the one I added here is enough, so I'm not going to add another one. Next, on the welcome screen, we click more again. Now we need to select SDK Manager. To get the React Native app run successfully on Android, we need to use the Android 13 Tiramisu SDK. On the left sidebar, we need to select the Android SDK. Then we go through the list. You can see here I have selected Android 13.0 Tiramisu. Here you have to check Android SDK Platform 33. You can find the instruction in the React Native documentation under Installation for Android Studio. Next, we have to do specific settings on Android for Intel and Apple Silicon Macs. In the Android SDK Manager window we just opened, if you have an Intel Mac, we need to select this option, or we select this option. Since we have an Apple Silicon Mac, we need to select this option, Google API ARM64. So let's go to Android Studio and check it again. If I scroll down, you can see here I have selected Google API ARM64 version 8 system image. This option is checked because I have an Apple Silicon Mac. For an Intel Mac, you need to select the option Intel 8664 Atom system image. So that is all the setup we need to do in Android Studio. We have now looked at the settings in Xcode and Android Studio. Let's now take a look at iOS and Android specific installations. For iOS, we need to install CocoaPods. For Android, we need to install the Java SDK. In the iOS section of the React Native documentation, over here it gives an instruction on how to install CocoaPods. So you can see here we have further information. So let's scroll down. The command they recommend to use to install CocoaPods is sudo gem install CocoaPods. If you use this command to install CocoaPods, once you create a new React Native project, you will encounter some errors like fail to install CocoaPods, like the one you see here. So the installation will be similar to something like this one. Instead of using gem to install CocoaPods, we are going to use Homebrew. So in the command line, we need to run brew install CocoaPods. Once we run this command, we will not encounter the CocoaPods error I showed previously when creating a new React Native CLI project. I have already installed CocoaPods. Let's also look at what we need to install for Android by going to the documentation. Over here, we will switch to the Android tab. We have already done the Node and Watchman installation. So let's move on to Java Development Kit. Over here, we need to install the Java SDK with the following commands. You can see here, it specifies Zulu version 17. On the Azul website, you can see here they have the latest version to be 20.0.2. If we use this latest version, we will encounter some errors if we run the app on Android. So to install the Java SDK correctly, we need to run this command so that we have the Zulu version 17. And once the installation is done, the content will be under this directory. The last configuration we need to do for Android is to configure the Android home environment variable. You can do it in the same way we did for Node. So here we can copy all these commands and add them to our .z profile or the .zshrc file. That is what we did previously. So let's go to the location again. You can see here we have the Z profile, so we can add the commands here or add it to the same file we exported Node. You can see over here I have already added those commands for the Android home environment variable. We have now done all the installations and configurations for iOS and Android. Next, let's create a new React Native CLI project for our audio room app using the latest template. In Terminal, I will pick a location. Over here, we want to create a new React Native app using the official template. To do that, we can use npx. So we can say npx React Native app latest init. Then we need to specify the app's name. Let's call it Audio Room Tutorial and press enter. The installation will take a while, so let's wait for a moment. You can see here the installation is successfully completed because we have all these green check marks. If you follow all the steps we covered in this video, you will have all these green check marks after successful installation. Next, let's open the app in VS Code. Over here, you can see I have run the command nps react native run iOS to run the app on iOS. So by running this command, we start the Metro server. You can see it is already running here. So if we want to run it on an iOS simulator, we can press I or press A to run it with the Android emulator. Before you run this command, you need to set the bundle ID of the app in Xcode. So let's go to the app's root folder. I will click to open it and go to the iOS folder and open it as well. You can see here we have an Xcode file. We can open this in Xcode, but the file we need to open in Xcode is this one. That is the file with extension XC workspace. So I will control click and open with Xcode. We have all these folders for iOS. So what we have to do here is to select the root folder, as I have already done, and go to General. So here we have two targets. That is the main target and the test targets. If I select the main target, what we need to do is to set the bundle ID. So you can see here we have com.amosjamfi.audio room tutorial. After you set the bundle ID, then we choose a device to run the app on. So I will select Amos iPhone. That will take some time, but after you run it for the first time, it will be faster. So on my iPhone, you can see we have the welcome screen. So this is how to run the app on an actual iOS device. Let's move on to run it on an Android device. To run the app on Android, we need to use Android Studio. So let's go back to the root folder. What we have to do is to open the Android folder in Android Studio. I have already done that, so I will open Android Studio. You can see from the toolbar I have attached my Motorola Android phone, so we can run it on that. You can see from the console that was successful. On the Motorola phone, we have our welcome screen. Another alternative to run the app on Android is to run it from VS Code. So we can use a similar command like we used for iOS. You can see over here, I ran the command nps react native run android to run it on the Android device, and that was successful. Thanks for watching this tutorial to the end. That is all we have in this video. I showed you how to install the various dependencies to start a new React Native CLI project on an Apple Silicon Mac. We dived into iOS and Android specific installations and settings. We then created a new React Native app and finally tested the app on iPhone and Android. In our next tutorial, we will continue from where we ended in this video to build a fully functional audio room app for iOS and Android. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications to receive updates about our new React Native videos. Thank you for watching this tutorial.